Hey everybody, it's Missy.
It's April.
And this is
SheelaNaGig.
Hey, welcome everybody. How you doing? Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening. As always, each week, of course, we explore our own SheelaNaGig. To us, that's a woman whose strength and perseverance has led her to greatness, who empowers us, inspires us. It could be somebody that you've heard of. Maybe we just want to share more. Maybe it's somebody you've never heard of, and we would love, certainly, to share more. So that's kind of where we're at. We're very inspired by these women who just, a lot of them didn't get the light they deserved.
Definitely. Yeah. Mine was a flash in the pan today.
Ooh,
my
a
Sheela.
Flash in the pan.
Yeah.
Oh, no, we're definitely going to, it's like a one-hit wonder. Flash in the pan, one-hit wonder, right?
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah. So, how are you, April?
I'm pretty good. How about yourself?
I'm good. I was telling you a little earlier, didn't go that much into it, but I had a really good physical with my doctor yesterday.
Isn't that
nice? Exciting?
Yes. Do tell.
Well, I had the same doctor for 27 years, and he sadly got a brain tumor and had to retire.
Aww.
I really miss him.
Yeah.
Dr. Tom Horowitz, amazing man, amazing doctor. But, I was really used to having my doctor.
Right,
Doctor for so long. And so this is my second physical, my second meeting with this doctor. He's at UCLA. And he's young. That's the other thing. As we get older,
so the doctors forget young. Is he cute?
Ooh, yes, he is in a nerdy kind of way.
Nerdy is cute. Yeah,
I think nerdy's cute. He's very smart. He's got a good sense of humor too, which I really like.
Yeah.
But he's very knowledgeable and he's very sweet and calm and just gave me his full attention, even though I asked a million questions, which I kept apologizing for. He told me I asked good questions, and I was like, yeah, you say that to everybody. He goes, no, I don't. You just say you ask good questions. Okay, but it went really well, and what's amazing is I did all this blood work, and I got my results back today, next day.
Oh, wow, very
I can't remember the last
fast.
time that happened.
Yeah.
And I'm really healthy. for the most part, so I'm very excited. That was just very encouraging, and I do feel healthy. I feel pretty damn good.
That's awesome.
My mom died when she was my age, so I just...
So it's nice. That's a good age to get a good feeling.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
It's nice to know that, I'm in good health as opposed to my mother at the same age.
Well, speaking of that, a couple of weeks ago when we were recording, it was later in the day.
Yeah.
And we were drinking wine.
What, us?
And us. We were actually recording
go
this
on.
right now. I know it's hard to believe, but this afternoon is afternoon, and we're drinking herbal tea. So I just wanted to drink to your health,
cheers.
right?
Cheers. To both of our health.
To our health, our good health
our
with
health.
herbal
Yes.
tea. How healthy is that?
Right. I feel so old now.
Oh, because we're drinking
herbal tea.
It's early in the day.
Yeah, it's ginger turmeric.
Ginger turmeric.
Oh, it's so good for you. It's got a lot of healing qualities, April.
I know, right? It was so healthy. I love it.
It was so healthy. But, of course, it's still early in the day. You never know what comes our way.
What sideways, ill-gotten ways we will develop within the next few hours.
You never know with April. That's the thing.
Yes.
Calm waters
run deep.
Run deep. Calm waters run deep. That's April for you, okay?
And tumultuous waters. I'm not saying you're tumultuous.
Super shallow.
Nope. I think you run pretty
shallow.
Yeah.
Oh my God. All right. Sorry, we digress. We like to digress. We like to digress.
We do.
Is there anything else we need to cover before we jump in?
Well, I was going to say, sometimes tumultuous waters can be very deceiving and deep too. So.
There you go. I like that better than the fact that, they're shallow.
I wouldn't call you shallow.
Thank you.
And
I don't think I'm shallow. I would not say that. I was saying earlier, I've been listening to a lot of crime podcasts lately.
Yeah.
And I feel a little bit guilty about it, which means I'm kind of an addict, obviously.
I think they call that guilty pleasures.
I almost got in a car accident yesterday. In
This
downtown LA because I was so distracted by moving forward in the podcast. I didn't want to listen to the fucking commercials. Like, I go, what's happened next?
Oh.
What happened next? You know, I think I've gotten a little addicted. I think I need to just...
We may have to curtail your consuming.
And I listen to a lot of different podcasts, but I'm just thinking, like, in particular, lately, I've been listening to mostly crime podcasts, and not just mostly crime podcasts, but Dateline of all fucking
things. Oh my gosh.
I fucking love Dateline. I've liked Dateline since I was... I don't know, as long as I can remember.
You're dark, Missy. You just have that dark side.
Darkness to me, I guess I do. It'd be like my songwriting is dark. It belies my personality. maybe that's why it helps me. I don't know. Anyway, I feel a little bit better since I feel like I'm at AA, you know?
Now that you've shared. Thank you for sharing, Missy.
I'm a crime addict. Hi, my name is Missy. I'm a crime addict.
Hi, Missy.
Hi.
Okay.
All right. So, April, you're starting this time.
Yes, I am.
Just the way we recorded it, which was kind of weird, we did 2 of April in a row, and we did 2 of me in a row.
Yes.
So we're hoping back to get in like our every other order.
Right. Proving once again that this podcast could really use a producer. So if anybody's interested in producing a podcast, we know of one.
We really don't have a budget. I'm sure that's very enticing.
Yes, we've just.
But wouldn't you love to be a part of this amazing project? Okay, just in case, we're putting it out there. Okay.
But moving right along. One of the reasons why we do this podcast is history has a way of having women who just affected profound change in the world, and then they sort of disappear into obscurity.
Yes.
That's what this is about. And it turns out that ratifying the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote in the 1920s, was no exception. There are a lot of familiar names that are attached to ratifying the 19th Amendment. But today, my Sheela is one of those women that disappeared into obscurity. And yet, not only did she play a pivotal role, but she played a sweet pivotal role. It was such an endearing moment that I was just like, I was in the mood for something sweet. And so this is kind of a sweet story.
I like a sweet story.
Okay, well then get ready. I'm going to tell you a mostly sweet story. So Phoebe Ensminger Byrne was born in Mount Verd, Tennessee on November 23rd in 1873. And her nickname was Febb. She went by Febb. Everybody called her Febb.
F-E-B?
F-E-B-B for Phoebe.
Phoebe.
Phoebe, Febb. And she was actually, as I said, this little be known dynamic force in delivering us the female vote, the women's vote.
Wow.
So we don't know a lot about her childhood because most of what we know about her comes through her son.
Okay.
But she was born in 1873 near Nyota, Tennessee. And she did, remarkably, at that time, graduate from what was then called U.S. Grant Memorial University. And today it's Tennessee Wesleyan. But in her day, most women never went to college. I mean, that was pretty unheard of.
I'm sure.
And she was also said to be a voracious reader, and she liked to consume 3 newspapers a day. Mm-hmm. And she also harbored a deep and constant resentment that society considered her intellect and her opinions beneath those of men. And she also seethed over the fact that women, as she was so well informed and engaged in current events and politics, she was enraged that she didn't have a right to vote. She felt that she was
Can
more...
you blame her?
No.
Can you imagine? I can't even imagine living in those times, that I couldn't vote, that my opinion was not heard. I mean...
And more than that, she recognized that so many men around her who did have that right had less education, were less informed, didn't read newspapers, didn't, go out of their way to understand issues. And so this really was a thorn in her side, more than a thorn.
Yeah.
So anyway, after college, Febb worked as a teacher, which also back in those days was pretty unheard of. Women didn't work outside the home. And she married James Lafayette Byrne, and he was a station master. And they also ran a family farm together, and that was where Febb worked alongside of a lot of the farm workers, all of whom had the right to vote, and many of whom were very low educated. And this just kind of kept dwelling on her. But anyway, the couple had 4 children, but sadly, James died pretty young in 1916 of typhoid fever.
Oh, no.
And that left Febb to raise her 3 children alone. Sadly, her daughter Sarah also died, I believe 2 years earlier before her husband passed away.
What loss.
Yeah. So she was very dedicated to being a homemaker and raising her children. She stopped teaching by that time. And her eldest son was Harry T. Byrne. And as I like to say, this is going to sound terrible, but I have to say it. Let's stick a pin in Harry, okay?
What do you mean you hate to say it? That's your favorite fucking thing to say. Put a pin in it.
I know, yeah, to put a pin in it, not necessarily to put a pin in Harry.
No.
Okay, I'm not trying to hurt poor Harry.
No.
But I want to put in a pin in the idea that she had this oldest son.
Okay.
Okay?
Will do.
Because we're going to fast forward, from the early 1900s to the 20s, the 1920s.
Okay.
And that was a decade when advocating for women's rights were just exploding. It was years before the ratification of the 19th Amendment, and women all over the country were involved in rallies and protests, fighting and demanding equality and the right to vote.
Go, ladies.
This is kind of going on.
Go, ladies. I love it. Yep.
And there were the familiar women like Harry Chapman Catt and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and of course Susan B. Anthony, that we know of, that are, household words in history, household names in history. About ratifying the 19th Amendment. And they all helped push women towards equality in the vote. But it took decades for their efforts to really get to the federal level. And even then, once it finally reached the federal level, the vote to really have it actually ratified and give women the vote was not guaranteed. Like there were quagmires, and one of those quagmires happened to have been the state of Tennessee, where Febb and her children lived. And what happened was most of the states, 38 states actually, had already voted on ratifying the amendment, but there were 8 holdout states voting against it, and for the ratification to pass, they just needed one more state.
Oh, okay. God.
So enter Harry Byrne, Febb's oldest son.
Okay. Can we take the pin out of him now?
Yes, we are removing the pin.
Okay.
Okay. So Harry was 24 years old when he was elected to the House of Representatives in East Tennessee legislature. And poor Harry had a pretty big old problem. He was part of the Tennessee vote that was voting to whether or not to ratify the 19th Amendment. And he was kind of caught between, he wanted to ratify, he wanted to vote in favor of ratification.
I should hope so.
But, in his heart, he wanted to vote in favor of ratifying the 19th Amendment, but
I should hope so.
He was up for re-election. And he needed his constituents' votes to be reelected.
Ugh.
And he knew the majority of his voting public was staunchly opposed to the ratification.
Oh.
And if he had voted to ratify the 19th Amendment, there was a strong probability that he would lose his seat in the House. So he showed up for the morning of the vote wearing a red rose on his lapel, and that was to signal that he was going to vote against. And leading up to the vote, there were these intense weeks of lobbying and debate within the Tennessee legislature. And there was a motion to table the amendment that got defeated the night before that was a 48-48 tie.
Ugh.
So the speaker called the measure for ratification the next morning, and to the shock of so many suffragettes who had packed into the Capitol with their yellow roses and sashes and signs demanding ratification.
Including his own mother.
No, his mother actually wasn't there in Tennessee to vote.
Okay.
She was not in the same area as the Capitol, I guess. But all these women showed up with their yellow roses and sashes, and they were not assured that this was going to pass. It was going to be really narrow if it was going to pass, and they were just beside themselves. And here we are on this day, and here's Harry showing up with a red rose that signifies that he's a no-go on voting for the ratification. But a funny thing happened on the way to the vote.
He got in a car accident and he couldn't make it and he couldn't vote.
No. But that was a good guess.
Okay.
Harry got a letter from his mother, Febb. Harry got a letter from his mother, Febb.
Okay.
And, Febb had no idea when she wrote this letter that he could have been the tying vote, that it was 48 to 48, they were deadlocked. And when she wrote this letter, and I'm going to share pieces of the letter with you, it's a hoot. So she didn't realize the impact that letter could have on the vote. So Harry was still sporting his red boutonniere and clutching his mother's letter when the vote happened. And apparently he said, "I," so gently, so quietly, and so quickly that it was like dead silence for a few seconds while it was registering that he had said "I," and that moment single-handedly granted the vote to women across America because it ratified the 19th Amendment.
So it just kind of slipped out of his, even though he's planning voting the other way.
Yep.
Because of that letter.
Because of what was in
He's
that letter.
wearing the red boutonniere or whatever. And in that moment, it just slipped out.
It just slipped out this fast, quiet, not very loud "I."
Yay, Harry. What a hero.
And that little gentle, quick "I" ended a half a century of campaigning by generations of suffragettes. And in her book, Chapman Catt wrote in 2023, Women Suffragettes and Politics, she wrote, "To get the word male, in effect, out of the Constitution cost the women of this country 52 years of pauseless campaigning." Like they really worked hard.
Of course it did.
For that itty bitty little gentle "I."
Oh, yes. And we all take it for granted these days. We don't even think about it.
Right.
But think about that.
Yes, it took decades. It took decades.
Thank you.
So anyway, in that moment, the crowd erupted. As you can imagine, the suffragettes were relieved and happy and celebrating, and they'd won their bitter fight. And the anti-suffragette movement was angry, fearful, resentment, horrified. And maybe they wanted to lynch Byrne a little bit. So he was said to have run up immediately after the vote to like the roof or the tower and hid from the mob of his constituents and fellow legislators because he went back on his red rose.
Whoa.
But
his mama must have been so proud. Febb must have been so proud of him.
Yes, indeed she was. But the next day, she was even probably more proud of him because Byrne went and showed his face. He came out of hiding, and he defended his last-minute reversal in a speech to the assembly. And for the first time, he publicly expressed his personal support for the universal suffragette movement, declaring, "I believe we have a moral and legal right to ratify." But he also made, and this is really what touched me so deeply, why I think it was so sweet, he made no secret of his mother's influence.
Aww.
He basically said it was her crucial role in the story of women's rights in the United States. He says, "I know that a mother's advice is always safest for her boy to follow." He explained, "And my mother wanted me to vote for the ratification."
Oh,
Yes.
to acknowledge his mother in that way.
A
It's just
24-year-old man, a young man.
Wow.
So if you're wondering what was in Febb's letter that persuaded a 24-year-old man to vote
Yes,
against
I'm
the
very
tide
curious
and
about the
follow
letter.
his mother's advice, turns out she wrote a 7-page letter by hand, and I actually read the letter, and I tried to transpose it, but her handwriting wasn't always easy to follow. And a lot of that letter just talks about the weather and relatives visiting.
Yeah.
And then she goes from writing about it, and I might get some of the words wrong because, again, I was trying to decipher her handwriting, but she wrote something about going to White Cliff on Labor Day, and then in the same exact paragraph, she writes, "Hurrah and vote for suffrage, and don't keep them in doubt. I noticed Chandler's speech. It was very bitter. I've been watching to see how you stood, but have not yet seen anything."
Ooh.
So Mama had been looking at the sun and watching to see what was going on.
Yeah.
And then she says something like Mr. Owensby or somebody, the millman, bought Charlie Water Bargett's house. I mean, she's kind of going back and forth between news. And then she writes, "You will tire of what I'm writing, but I haven't anything else to write about. But I do hope you are still in the notion of not making the race this fall." She didn't want him to run again.
Wow.
"I hope you see enough politics to know it is not one of the greatest things to be one. What say ye?" she writes. And then she goes on to say, "Write, Mother, every time you have a chance, for I am always looking for a letter when you are away." She nears the end of the letter when she writes, "Don't forget to be a good boy and help Mrs. Thomas Cat with rats. Just rat in ratification. Ha ha. No more from Mama. This time with lots of love."
Her.
So it wasn't, like I thought this was going to be this passionate, heart-wrenching, you must do this. But no, she just put in a few mentions in between a lot of home gossip.
Very endearing and just
and
sweet, like you said. Yeah.
Help Mrs. Cat with her rats.
I love that.
As in ratification, haha.
I love that.
And then she ends her letter actually with asking Harry to pick up some music when he comes home for her.
Aww, I love that.
So passage of the 19th Amendment, the ratification of the 19th Amendment, added a legitimacy to all of those women across the United States who not only really were so politically active for decades and finally felt empowered, finally getting their voice heard, having this happen. It was by one measly vote.
Wow.
And the victory did have a ripple effect in the 20s, and women began, the roaring 20s, they began wearing shorter skirts, and they went out more, they went to parties,
They became
flappers and participated in all kinds of previously taboo activities, boozing, dancing, the roaring 20s.
Bring it.
Bring it. Arguably, it was the most defining feature, the ratification of the 1920s, and it lives in stark contrast to the way women viewed themselves in society before them, being very prim and not being very bold and going out there. But I would be remiss if I didn't know that when Tennessee became the 36th state to ratify the all-important amendment and made it national victory for women, allowing the vote, we do have to remember that we're not really talking about all women.
Right.
Although some Black women, particularly those who lived in the North and the West, now also enjoyed the right to vote, millions in the South were blocked from being able to register for the vote by these horrific Jim Crow laws that legitimized racial segregation. For many Black women, August 1920 wasn't the culmination of a movement. It marked the start of a brand new fight. And poll taxes, literacy tests, fraud, and intimidation kept many African American voters, both male and female, away from the polls. Many states also had so-called grandfather clauses that prevented the descendants of disenfranchised slaves, despite now being free from voting.
God.
Yeah, and I feel
So
like
shitty. So
it
shitty.
was. I mean, as much as this was a victory and a really sweet story and a little ironic, I
It
felt
just didn't
like
apply to everybody.
yeah, I would
unfortunately.
be remiss in not saying, well, it wasn't all women.
Right. It's never that easy, right?
Yeah. So
Unfortunately.
so obviously that ratification didn't immediately eradicate the inability to vote everywhere. And Native Americans, both men and women, also did not gain the right to vote until the Snyder Act of 1924. But ratifying the 19th Amendment ended a large number of women's fights for the vote. And Harry Byrne, with his red rose pinned to his lapel, had really waited till the very last minute to decide what he was going to do. After a hard-fought campaign, Harry Byrne actually narrowly won re-election in the fall of 1920.
Oh, wow.
So he did actually get re-elected to his seat. He did not...
He had to feel vindicated by that. I mean,
Yeah,
that he worried that he wouldn't be able to run, making that decision, but in the end, he honored how he really felt about it and still was able to run. Like, that's pretty amazing.
It was. And he didn't follow his mother's advice to get out of politics.
No.
And he went on actually to have a long career in public office in Tennessee. He married Ellen Folsom Cottrell in 1937. They had one child, Harry T. Burns Jr. And Harry Burns Sr. died on February 19th, 1977 at a good age of 81.
Okay.
And very sweetly, although most of us have forgotten that little story about Febb writing that letter and changing Harry's mind, kind of lost in the history of that ratification. In downtown Knoxville, Tennessee, on the corner of Clinch Avenue and Market Square, a stone's throw from what used to be the federal courthouse, there is a statue of a man and a woman who will occasionally attract a little bit of curiosity. And the man sitting on the chair, his posture relaxed, clad in a suit and tie, and very sweetly, although most of us have forgotten that little story about Febb writing that letter and changing Harry's mind, kind of lost in the history of that ratification, was none other than Harry. And the woman standing next to him, taller than him, above his head, with one hand perched somewhat protectively on his shoulder, is our Sheela Febb.
Oh, I love that.
So I just, I think that there's so much things that we think about that are sad, and this story has sadness for the women and men who were still not able to vote.
Sure.
But still, this was a little sweet story, and I was looking for something sweet today.
I get it. I especially need something sweet after all my crime addiction.
That's it. I was countering all of the crime.
I feel so dirty. I feel so sullied. This is like a nice cleansing story for my soul.
Oh.
For my soul. No, and you forget those little stories. It's such a little story because she wasn't this historical person involved in politics per se, but her letter made such a huge impact and such a difference.
Yeah, I mean, it really changed the lives for the whole country. It really changed the makeup of the whole country. It was such a profound effect. And even though, again, the right wasn't granted to all women or all people to vote, it did take us a giant step further.
Yeah, and that he proudly shared it.
And that I love the fact that dude showed up the next day and said, yeah, my mother changed my mind.
Exactly.
And my mother told me to be a good boy, and and by golly, he decided mother's advice is best, although he didn't follow it for his own political career.
That's true, but I'd like to think that my son follows my advice.
I would like to think the same about my son, but I know he doesn't often.
I'm sure he does on occasion.
I will say this. I bought some new cookware, and it had to be assembled, and I asked him to assemble it, and he went and ran and did it. And I was so sweet. I really... So sometimes sons do listen to their mother.
They do. I find my son listens to me. He doesn't tell me he listens to me, but I'll notice his actions. And I really try not to. I so often want to be like, see, you did it. But no.
Yep, zip it.
I just observe and I think, okay. There's a little respect there, a little acknowledgement in his doing.
Yep.
Doesn't have to say it.
Yep.
Doesn't have to tell me, but yeah. So yeah, and I think a relationship. I mean, relationships between parents and their children are special, but mother and son, it's kind of
it is a special bond. And
interesting.
This was I just love this story.
I do too. It's so sweet.
Yeah, on so many levels.
Are we gonna get a picture of both of them?
Yeah, I'm gonna say yes, and maybe even.
Can we call him a support bro?
He's definitely a support bro. Yep.
Don't kill us, Dana.
Dana, our editor, does not like the term support bro.
Laura Elin kind of made it up. When we were doing one of our launches, Laura, our dear friend, and she was our, what's the word?
MC.
Yeah, she was our MC. She was our monitor, and she brought that up, which we thought was hysterically funny.
Oh, you know what she was? She was our moderator.
Thank you. We thought it was kind of funny, support bro. But Dana, I don't blame her. Because, Dana has a hell of a husband.
She does.
We're going to give a little shout out to Gene Sullivan right now.
Yes. And Gene, by the way, Gene gives us awesome
He does.
Sheilas. Both of them do. Dana and
They both
Gene.
do. They're quite a team in many ways.
They are.
Oh, it's funny, too, because I was talking to Gene the other day, and he said something about us arguing.
Oh, yeah.
He
didn't like it,
during
apparently.
Liz Carmichael. He didn't like us arguing. No, he didn't. And I said, well, we've never really argued before. And he said, What about Duncan? What about...
She was one of the psychics.
Yeah. And
Clairvoyance.
Oh my gosh, really?
He remembers our fights.
Yeah, and I thought, wow.
I'd forgotten. You'd forgotten.
I was kind of flattered that he actually listens, but he said it's kind of hard to escape when Dana's working on an episode. So,
fair enough.
I get it. So a salute out to the Sullivans.
Yes, salute and thank you.
For sure. Thank you. And thank you for listening. Thank you for bringing that to my crime-sullied mind. Thank you for bringing me just this beautiful breath of fresh air before we dive into one of my...
deep, dark, gruesome.
But important, but so
important.
Freaking important.
Bring it on, Missy.
I will. I'll be bringing it on here for our next episode. You'll hear from us shortly. And thanks for listening.
Thank
everybody.
you.
Peace out.
Peace out.
Sheela.